Hello guys, welcome back. Today, I need to talk about a situation that in my opinion is not getting enough attention in Sean Monahan's struggles with the Calgary Flames. Really, since 2019, Sean Monahan has been pretty putrid, and especially this season, it's gotten worse with just recently him being healthy scratched for the first time in his NHL career, which could lead to a move down the line. But when it comes to Sean Monahan, what is going on with him? How have these struggles come about? And could we actually see a trade involving Monahan this offseason? Watch till the end for all the trade talk and all the updates, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 50% of the people that are watching are not subscribed, so if you like hockey, this channel is the place to be. Now, to me personally, I think Sean Monahan is one of the most underrated trade pieces going into this next offseason. He's been floating around that fourth line extra forward role, especially this year, but the fact is he makes way too much money to be in that position. He makes $6.4 million for the next 2 seasons, and Calgary needs as much cap space as they can get in this era of contention. And to me personally, that would still be a pretty easy contracted trade. Even if Sean Monahan has had his struggles, a lot of teams would be looking for a potential middle six center that could bounce back for them and has the goal scoring pedigree that Monahan does. So it'd be a contract that could pretty easily be dealt, and you could get some pretty big time players back for the Flames. And personally, with how Monahan has fit with this Calgary roster, I think his time as a Flame, especially at the level he was at a couple of years ago, are completely done. And we also heard a little bit from Frank Seravalli a week ago talking about this situation and talking about a situation that could resolve in a trade with the Flames.
But I do have a Calgary connection, Sean Monahan. But I think the Flames are lurking in the weeds in terms of potentially having another significant move in them. And yes, trading Sean Monahan after a second consecutive down season would represent trading him at probably the lowest value he's been at in his career. But part of this also comes down to money. I think part of this, when you look at also the Flames and their roster and how things have shaped up, there's another clear pecking order that exists there.
And as Frank Seravalli said, the Flames were kind of poking around making a potential Sean Monahan trade at this last NHL trade deadline, but it does make sense that they would keep him, just having a locker room guy around the team that's really solid with everybody, and even in a fourth line role, I still think Monahan can provide some good value there, so it makes sense they'd try to keep him for a playoff run. But honestly, once the Flames win the Cup or get eliminated, I think that's the point when Sean Monahan is almost instantly dealt. To me, the Flames aren't going to waste too much time, especially since they might want to be competitive in free agency and have as much cap space to humanly work with. And the thing is, I think Sean Monahan is really the odd guy out when it comes to the cap hits on Calgary. The problem is, I think personally, we aren't going to ever see the Sean Monahan we saw back in 2019. If you go back to that season where Johnny Gaudreau was also having his amazing year, in 78 games, he had 34 goals, 48 assists for 82 points. And even at the time, although I thought he was a little bit overrated because of Gaudreau was carrying a lot of the load 5-on-5, he was still having an excellent season, was finishing at an amazing rate, and was a good overall centerman. The problem is, since then, pretty much everything has gone wrong for him. You go into the next year after having 82 points, where Monahan in 70 games only got 22 goals, 26 assists for 48 points. The next season would be even worse, where in 50 games, he got 10 goals, 18 assists, 28 points. And then this year, where in 63 games, he has only 8 goals, only 14 assists for 22 points. Now this year, I think his defensive game has been improving, but the problem is the years I mentioned, 2018 through 2020, those are really the years that Sean Monahan was playing awful defensively. At the start of his career, he was developing an acumen and a reputation for being good defensively, and I think his first maybe 3 seasons, that was definitely the case. He was a strong defensive center, but since then, he's definitely leaned more on offense and prioritized the offense, which has left his defensive game kind of struggling and a lot more inconsistent. Thankfully, he's picked it up a little bit now since he is more in a bottom 6 role and figuring that out, but at the same time, he's a player that's been all over the place, developing his offense, his defense, and 2019, even the offense when it came together, the defense was an all-time low. This is a player that in terms of value is very hard to try and nail, but he's a guy that, again, going into the trade market will get a lot of interest, no doubt. But to me, the one word that I kind of always go back with Sean Monahan is the word overvalued. I still like the guy, and again, when it comes to locker room presence, everybody everybody has been talking about him being such a good presence in that Calgary locker room. But at the same time, I think in his early years, he developed this defensive reputation that really started to fade away, and I think everybody still considered Sean Monahan a amazing defensive center still in 2019 when he was putting up those points, and that really wasn't the case. To me, Sean Monahan has almost always been offense or no defense, or more defense and less offense, especially 5-on-5, and to me, there hasn't really been a middle ground. And now, with Sean Monahan having that wrist surgery, I think back in 2017, and now this hip surgery this last year, those are two major factors for a player that wasn't already too fast and really prioritized his shot to be able to get his points. And now you take that type of style away from him, and there's so much less to be able to add to a team. To me personally, although he's still 27, I don't think Monahan is going to be able to get close to that 2019 level unless he truly gets back healthy, works as hard as he possibly can, and gets a great winger besides him. We also saw Johnny Gaudreau kind of be split away from Sean Monahan at one point. That definitely had a impact on the production for sure, but at the same time, Monahan has not been playing well enough over these past few years, and it makes sense why we've come to this point. He's been awful over the past 2 seasons especially, and I think is deserving in terms of play for being in this spot. And I really don't like to throw around the overrated word all too often, but if there's one overrated player on the Flames, it is absolutely Sean Monahan. I mean, I didn't realize this until this recording, but in terms of the even strength of power play production, it's pretty crazy to see. His power play points, he has 13 points on the power play out of his entire 22 points on the season, and in the last 25 games, he has 3 points total. It's been absolutely horrible to just watch this downfall of a player that was very talented and very gifted and was one of the first really great pieces to start out with that kind of pseudo Flames rebuild they had going on in the last few seasons. It's really unfortunate to see how it's really turned out, but it is a situation that does need to be resolved. Monahan's even strength play has not been good enough. His pace has not been good enough. Now his shot hasn't been where it needs to be. And all of those factors, all of those things, you put them together and it just creates a mess of a player right now. And it's really unfortunate to see, especially for this Flames team that, again, needs as much cap space as possible and wants Monahan to be in a great top 6 position. He's been overtaken by almost every center on the team, and at this point, long term, I just don't see a fit there, and I see a trade happening really soon. Now, when it comes to Sean Monahan's contract, he makes $6.37 for this year and next, so for a team trading for him in the offseason, it would kind of be like an early rental, let's say. The only problem is that he has a 10-team no-trade list, so that limits the options that Monahan can go to, but at the same time, I still think there'd be a lot of teams out there, specifically, that would want a middle 6 player that can win faceoffs, that can score goals, can put up production. The problem is, it's a big maybe right now, and it's a big risk to make. I think especially since Calgary would want a decent fit for Monahan. Now, if you ask me what I would actually give up for a guy like Monahan, for me personally, it wouldn't be more than like a late 2nd round pick, but in my personal opinion, with the value and the reputation that Monahan has, I think Calgary will get way more than they really should in a Sean Monahan trade. To me, what it would kind of look like would maybe be a 2nd round pick, a good prospect, and maybe something on top of that, like a 3rd rounder, a 4th rounder, maybe even an NHL player going back to the Flames. In my opinion, one team that makes a lot of sense, especially if we're talking about an offseason trade, is the Minnesota Wild. Cap-wise, it would be the worst to try and finagle, but with Minnesota, they're in desperate need of centers, especially for the next season, and I feel like he'd be pretty good alongside a winger like Kirill Kaprizov, or a Mats Zuccarello, or a Kevin Fiala, which could, again, boost his play and boost his morale. In terms of a trade, it would actually look like, I feel like the Minnesota Wild will give their Canucks 2022 2nd rounder, on top of that, forward prospect Adam Beckman, and maybe a 3rd rounder in 2022 on top of that. That, to me, is a pretty realistic trade, especially for the Flames not really having too much long-term stake in him, and also Monahan not being signed long-term. I think for Minnesota, though, wanting to be as short-term as possible in these next 2 years makes sense, especially with Monahan being a UFA after next season. Now, the thing is, when it comes to Monahan and his shorter-term deal, he definitely would go more towards contending teams that want to potentially still leave him off in free agency after next year, but I think there could be maybe a couple more rebuilding teams that would like to bring him on. First is the Detroit Red Wings, who I think in their system would be pretty good good as a potential second or third line center for them. He's also a player that I think they would like to sign long-term, and I think Monahan would like to sign long-term in Detroit as well. That's a possibility. For them, it would obviously be a second-round pick, which would be a pretty good one. Maybe a prospect on top of that, like an Elmer Soderblom or something, and maybe a fourth as well. That, again, is kind of what I'm looking at there, and I think for the Flames, they could still get an NHL player back, and Detroit might trade a smaller player that could fit on their fourth line, but that's kind of what I would be thinking. Another team that I think could also make a little bit of sense is maybe Buffalo, especially if the price isn't too high. They're obviously trying to be as competitive as possible, and Monahan's a good locker room guy, good positive presence. That could be pretty solid to add on to their middle six and have somebody there to teach some of the younger kids as well, like a Dylan Cousins especially, who I think is a pretty close player to what Monahan was as well. So there's a couple options there, as well as rebuilding teams that could make a fight for Monahan too. Now, one last team that I think makes a lot of sense for Monahan, not a team that's a contender or really a bottom five team, a kind of middle team right now in the Columbus Blue Jackets. The team that center situation is kind of all over the place right now. They got Roslovic, Sillinger, Kuraly, and Gauntz as their listed centers, and with Max Domi gone, I think they could potentially get someone else. I think Sean Monahan fits that bill and could play on that second line C spot behind Roslovic going into next season. They're an interesting team though. One player that I think would definitely go back to Calgary is Alexander Texier. He was a player we kind of saw in a lot of trade rumors right at the end of the trade deadline. He did not end up getting dealt, but I think the Flames would definitely like to have a scoring winger maybe on that third line going into the future, and he, I think, would fit that bill pretty well. Maybe just a second round pick and Texier gets that deal done, and I think for both sides, there could be some value there, especially if Columbus is able to sign Monahan long term. But really, at this point, it's not up to Calgary, it's not up to Daryl Sutter or anybody. It's up to Sean Monahan to really revive his career. In my opinion, this is a kind of interesting situation where Monahan's kind of at a crossroads. He can either continue to go down this road of struggling and really falling victim to injuries, or he can work even harder, get to an even better place potentially. We've seen players rebound from worse before, in my opinion, and I feel like Monahan still has potential. He still has talent, and I still think there's some to be unlocked there, even if I think he's overrated in the past, even if I'm not the biggest fan of him at the same time. He's obviously shown he can be a great offensive player and even a good defensive one, and I think for teams that could use some value and could use a bounce back player, Monahan could be that guy, but it's got to take a lot of work and it's got to take a lot of patience, because right now Sean Monahan is not the guy. He's not the guy to be in that great offensive position, and it might take a lot of patience for him to get there. It'll be an interesting situation to keep an eye on. I think he'll probably still be on that bottom six and playing during the playoffs, but at the same time, this is a player that looks like will not be a part of Calgary's long-term future, and especially if they're going to win a cup in the next couple of seasons, Monahan might not be a part of it if they're going to get to that level, which is really sad to, again, think about, since he was one of the first pieces added to that Flames rebuild a few years ago. But at this point, injuries happen, and it really seems to have caught up to a really talented player in Sean Monahan. But that'll be it for today, guys. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of Sean Monahan's game, and let me know what team you guys think could potentially trade for him. Should your team trade for him? What do you think the offer would actually look like? Let me know your thoughts down below. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for this breakdown if you did enjoy, and make sure you share this video with your friends. Get the Monahan news out there, I guess. It's really honestly a pretty underrated story, and I think more people need to know about Monahan's struggles and really how bad he's been recently. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Click this card if you want some more hockey rankings content right on playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.